Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another hour of Healthy Conclusions, where we try to give our listeners important information on nutrition, exercise, and holistic, alternative, and integrative medicine. Please take a minute to visit our website at www.healthyconclusions.com and like us on Facebook. My name is Bob Neugebauer, and I will be your host for this evening's show. Tonight's show is being brought to you by Altrua HealthShare, which has been serving its members and families with their health care needs since 1997. Please take a moment to visit their website at altruahealthshare.org or call 888-244-3839 to see just what Altrua HealthShare can offer for your family's health share needs, and it could mean substantial savings. Our guest for this evening is Dr. Greg Furch. Greg received his B.S. from University of North Dakota in human biology, attended Northwestern College of Chiropractic, graduating in 1993. Greg has established a practice here in Boise and has been a member of the Chiropractic Peer Review Committee since its inception and served 2 terms as the Idaho Association of Chiropractic Physicians Board. Would you like to add anything to that, Dr. Furch?
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for the time to chat with you today and just express my thanks also for your heart in helping people, frankly, live a better, healthier lifestyle. But as far as adding to my bio, I guess I really do enjoy or want to comment that I enjoyed my time in the Army. I was a medic for 11 years. And that gave me a diversity of experience. I've driven ambulance, worked in emergency rooms, and clinics all over the western half of the country. And I think that's an experience I wouldn't trade for anything.
Well, we thank you for your service, sir.
Well, you're welcome.
I think our audience would appreciate if you could explain to them just what the function of a chiropractor is and what their approach is in keeping patients healthy. Are they pretty much the same, and do they have the same approach, or is it different for each one?
Well, generally speaking, chiropractic is a non-drug pharmaceutical approach to the healing arts. I think it's the 3rd largest healing art. They're licensed in all 50 states. It requires 5 years of academic years of post-grad training to become a chiropractor. There's national boards involved, state boards in many states. So they take a more holistic approach, and it's an alternative to kind of some of the more allopathic side that we hear a lot about.
Well, let's start off here. Dr. Furch, could you give our audience an explanation of what epigenetics is and how it affects our health and that of our children, and why you're so interested and involved in it?
Well, epigenetics is a branch of science that's gaining more favor as we come to understand what really causes or initiates a disease process in our case, humans, but this applies to really all animals. Epi means above, and, of course, genes. So the science of epigenetics is the study of above the genes, or in essence, what controls our gene expression. And I'm interested in it because I believe that is really the key to health. I believe that maybe there's some misconceptions regarding what causes ill health or disease or dis-ease in human beings.
Is there any hard evidence that epigenetics plays a role in what diseases we acquire throughout our lives?
Well, I think the science is pretty clear. Our genes control our body's responses to environmental pressures. So, for instance, the U.S. Olympic Training Center is in Colorado Springs, a higher elevation, because in that environment, our body naturally makes more red blood cells. If we go down to the sea level, we don't need as many red blood cells because the oxygenation is easier at sea level than it is at mile-high levels in Colorado. So our genes, I believe God gave us the genetic programming to respond to different environments. And so in some cases, that response leads to negative impacts, and in some, it's positive. So when we go to a higher elevation and our body produces more red blood cells, that's positive. We need that. That's why we train at the Olympic Training Center at a higher elevation, because we oxygenate better at that level. So I think the science is pretty clear that the environment affects how our genes express themselves or how things transpire in the human body.
Is it true that epigenetics is actually a study of how genes turn on and off in your body? Is that correct?
Well, yeah, ultimately that is what it is, the control mechanisms, the outside forces that cause our body or our genes to respond in a certain way. Again, going back to the elevation example, higher elevation, less oxygen, our body then, you can get deep into the weeds on how the body makes more red blood cells, but it does. And so, yes, our environment controls how our genes are expressed. It's sort of like flipping on the light switch.
So can that also flip on a switch that turns off our body's immune system to detect cancer or other diseases and allow that to basically come into our body and take over?
Well, yeah, it probably in a simplified way. It's a little bit more complex than that. But, for instance, if we live in a stressed, toxic environment, that the body goes into the fight or flight response. Generally, part of fight or flight is inflammation, and inflammation in the body has a negative effect on almost all our body systems, including the immune system. So when we're dumping energy into fight or flight, we're not putting the energy into cancer suppression. I believe that most of us are making cancer cells at a fairly regular basis. But most of us have a healthy enough immune system, and our genetics are able to control our system that fights and cleans up those cancer cells and infections that we might otherwise succumb to.
Scientists are trying to manipulate our genes using drugs to get them to turn on and off. Could it be that these genes could be affected by what we eat depending on our diets, and they could turn these genes on and off with our diets and nutrition we're taking in?
Well, I think that is also very clear in the science. Our environment in its totality affects whether genes are turned on and off. And in some cases, the environment involves, let's say, our home. A couple of years ago, there was a situation where formaldehyde in flooring was a precipitator of cancer. And so that type of environmental toxin created a situation where people were more susceptible to cancer. Other chemicals can be involved. We hear like the commercials for asbestos, heart disease. If we live in a stressed environment, that we're more prone to heart disease. They've done research, and they found that Vietnamese folks living in Vietnam that eat fish and whole grain rice have virtually no heart disease. But those very same people emigrate to the United States and live like we do in the environments that we do, and then they get heart disease at the same rates that we do. And no one changed their genes. It's just an environmental situation turned on the gene that allow that person to go into fight or flight, which leads to inflammation, and inflammation is at the root of not only heart disease, but virtually all chronic conditions.
So you believe the toxins that we breathe or are exposed to with household products, etc., could be responsible for turning these genes on and off and causing us to acquire different diseases. Is that correct?
Well, absolutely. And, again, it's not only the toxins that we breathe, but it's the toxins we eat. I personally don't drink soda or extremely rarely. So it's not just toxins around us, but it's toxins we willingly consume. It's toxic, stressful environments, psycho-emotional stress. In our office, we talk a lot about eat well, move well, and think well. Sedentary lifestyle and the lack of movement is a biomechanical toxin to the body that has significant ramifications. A few months ago, an article was released suggesting that sitting is the new smoking when it comes to a negative impact on our health.
Can you hold that thought for a minute? We're going to have to break for a quick commercial. We'll be back in a few minutes. You're listening to Health Conclusions, brought to you by Altrua Health Share, with your host Bob Neugebauer on 580 KIDO and 107.5 FM. Welcome back to Health Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We're speaking with Dr. Greg Furch, sponsored by AltruaHealthShare.org. So, Dr. Furch, you were talking to us about your motto or a credo in your practice: eat well, think well, move well. Can you explain those three objectives that you use in your office?
Well, for us, eat well constitutes making sure we get enough of the basic nutrients. Our thought is that if we're not dealing with the basics, it's harder to manage specific conditions. So if a person is depleted or deficient in, let's say, omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil, if you will, it's much harder to find a formulation that helps them with thyroid symptoms or diabetic symptoms. So for us, we dial down to the basics and encourage a lifestyle that starts there. So eat well means avoiding toxic foods, toxic substances, and getting enough of the proper nutrients that we need genetically. Think well means managing our thoughts, our lifestyle, our stressful situations, such that doesn't have a negative impact on our health. And move well means getting the proper amounts of exercise, spinal movements. In our business, we talk a lot about the importance of chiropractic care, chiropractic adjusting to maintain spinal function and neurologic function. So if we dial it down to three basic things, it's the eat well, move well, think well.
So how does this sitting play into it that we were talking about at the end of the last session in terms of being the new smoking?
Well, our bodies were genetically programmed to be moving, and I'm not going to possibly dig way deep into the weeds on all the neuroscience of it, but let's suffice it to say that there are nerve endings in the spine and spinal joints that if the spine isn't moving, they're not sending a signal to a part of the brain, and when that doesn't happen, we start to lose some of that function. So that it's called proprioception, and that is vital to our overall health. And when we're not moving, we're not producing that proprioceptive signal to the brain, and it has a tremendous negative impact on our health by leading to inflammation. And as previously we noted, inflammation appears to be the root of virtually all chronic diseases, everything from heart disease, diabetes, fibromyalgia, Crohn's disease, colitis, most forms of cancer. Virtually all of it is inflammatory.
Well, most of us sit for a good part of the day, and, I see this all the time, even with myself. I try to stand up every 20 or 30 minutes just to move around. But do you think this is a factor in the problems we have today with obesity and diabetes, which are now costing us billions of dollars a year?
Well, yeah, the ill health has a tremendous societal impact. Yes, from a financial point of view, but also from a quality of life point of view. You know, you're doing a wonderful thing here, Bob, bringing, information to people, and I think that we try and accomplish the same thing in our office to make people aware that our lifestyle, these diseases aren't insurmountable. There is hope. There is light at the end of the tunnel. We can make a difference on our, outcomes, our lifestyle. I hear in my office on occasion people will say something to the effect that, oh, don't get old, it's hell to get old, you spend all your time and money seeing doctors. But it doesn't have to be that way. And that's why I talk a lot about epigenetics, in that there is a controller of the genes, and that controller is largely in our control. So because Grandpa had heart disease doesn't mean we're doomed to have heart disease.
So when you meet a patient for the first time, say I walk into your office, what is your approach to the patient? What do you look for, and how do you try to treat them? Are you looking for symptoms? Are you looking for what they eat? Are you looking for fitness levels? What do you look for, and how do you help them?
Well, for us, people have a cultural view of what chiropractors are, and in the past, a lot of it has been chiropractors are good for neck pain, back pain, headaches, and something numbing. Now, the broader perspective is chiropractic can be effective for things way beyond those things because of the neurologic impact. So oftentimes people come into our office for pain issues because that's how we've been kind of ingrained culturally. So obviously we want to assist people in that aspect. We want to make their golf game accessible that next weekend because they're in a tournament or something. We want to have a positive impact on their lifestyle. However, then we graduate from managing the condition, and that's one of the beauties of chiropractic care is it has phenomenal backing in the management of some of the pain conditions that I mentioned earlier, but it also has an effect on the spine, the neurology, and therefore a wellness component based on proprioception, neurologic function that I spoke to a minute ago. So we manage the condition that brought them in, but we educate them hopefully to a better quality of life so that at the back end in our office we have fewer people that are making that suggestion that it's not such a fun aspect to get old because you spend all your time and money, resources seeing doctors.
So when you're talking about people coming to see you that have back pain, which, by the way, cost $82 billion a year in Medicare benefits, do you find that they come to you because you're using a much less invasive way to help them?
That is part of it. People, Mr. Google has been a wonderful thing in healthcare. People have been able to do a lot of their own research and look into alternatives like that. Years ago, it seemed like chiropractic was built on, the tougher cases. People, as a last-ditch effort, would go to a chiropractor and find relief where maybe they were directed or it was suggested that they needed surgery or other, pharmaceuticals, possibly addictive medications and stuff that wasn't congruent with their healthcare philosophy, and so they were seeking out something else.
Well, I know that we, excuse me, you as a chiropractor are into more natural types of medicine. Do you use a lot of supplements when you're trying to get people back to good health? And if you do, can you tell us how important that is in terms of the quality of their health and well-being, their physical well-being?
I personally don't use a great deal of supplements. I know that there are other people out there that do, and they get wonderful results. But for us, number one is a good naturally sourced omega-3 fatty acid. There's a difference between natural and naturally sourced. And unfortunately, we have to dig into the details of some of these definitions. Naturally sourced means that the omega-3 came from the original source. Many of the manufacturers, they'll distill the oil down to the fish oil, down to just the fish oil, and they'll put synthetic omega-3 back in it. So we look at some of those things. There's research now that shows that there's a likelihood that synthetic vitamins are carcinogenic, and at the very least not as biologically available as whole food vitamins. So for us, we talk a lot about omega-3 fatty acid because every cell in the body requires it. They call it an EFA, an essential fatty acid, because it is essential. Number two, we talk vitamin D. Vitamin D is critical for our immune function and numerous other functions in the body. And so if we're vitamin D, our body isn't going to function at its optimum. And then we talk a lot about probiotic. We've changed our soils. Some of the fertilizing and agricultural practices have depleted the natural God-given bacteria out of our soil, so we're not getting the probiotic we need through our food consumption. And then we talk about a whole food vitamin because, again, some of the quality of our foods, when we pick our tomatoes when they're green and ship them to Idaho, they don't have the nutrient content as locally grown tomatoes, for example, would.
Yep.
So we really dial into four basic things and say, let's get the eat well, move well, think well on track, and then if there happens to be some remaining symptoms or some issues as a result of previous bad choices, then we can dial in on that. But I find that it's a little bit more challenging to chase a thyroid condition if the underlying health and wellness isn't there to support that.
We're going to have to take a quick break here, Greg. You're listening to Health Conclusions, brought to you by Altrua Health Share with your host, Bob Neugebauer, on 580 KIDO AM and 107.5 FM. Welcome back to Health Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We're speaking with Dr. Greg Furch, sponsored by AltruaHealthShare.org. Going back to our last discussion, you were talking about the importance of omega-3s, which are obtained from fish, particularly salmon, wild-caught fish, and from grass-fed beef. Do you recommend these products, these things that they are always talking about, for part of your diet? And do you also recommend the fact that people should be eating organically?
Well, that's a great question, Bob. Yes, we do talk a lot about that very thing in our office. In fact, one of the products that we do make available to our patients here is a good naturally sourced omega-3 fatty acid. Ours comes from smaller fish like herring because, even up the food chain as high as salmon, unfortunately we've got some toxicity in our waters, and there's something called bioaccumulation, and the bigger the fish, the more greater the possibility of mercury accumulation. But yes, a great quality naturally sourced omega-3 fatty acid is imperative. And yes, and one of the other sources is grass-fed beef. Interestingly, farmed salmon that are fed cornmeal. Corn is full of omega-6 fatty acids, the bad kind, if you will. When they do fatty acid testing, the farmed salmon have a low concentration of 3s and a high concentration of 6s. So the notion that you are what you eat really does apply in nature.
Well, when you start talking about corn products, let's get into something a little bit on the side of that. Do you believe that GMO products and those sprayed with glyphosate can have an effect on our genes by turning them on and off to the detriment of our health? And especially, when you say you're feeding corn to salmon, who knows what's in that corn?
Yeah, absolutely. Corn, just in general, of course, has a higher concentration of omega-6s, but then when they're modified. So, there's people that, argue to the tooth that there's nothing wrong with GMOs. I believe that maybe we should reconsider that. I think that in general I take kind of a religious view, and just because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should. And I think, God kind of had creation worked out pretty well for what we're supposed to be doing. And so I have questions myself about creating a food product that can be sprayed with a toxic herbicide. That's something I would prefer not to consume myself, and that's something we talk about in the office. So all these environmental things have an impact on our health. And so whether it's the food we consume or the house we live in or the thoughts we have or the lack of removing our keisters from the couch, it all has an impact.
Well, do you think people eating organically would keep them healthier? I mean, I do that myself, and I've found the quality of the food, the taste of the food is much different than when I'm eating processed food.
I absolutely agree. And organically and locally grown, the closer you get your food to the source, generally the healthier it is. For instance, I mentioned tomatoes. When a fruit is ripe and ready to fall off the plant is when it has its greatest amount of nutrients. That's when plants of all types, trees, fruits, nuts, they put the most nutrient into that particular fruit, because what is the fruit? It's a seed pod. When do seeds need the nutrients? When they're about to fall and be planted, so to speak. So trucking in tomatoes from wherever, they're picked green so they last long enough to get here. So that's a tomato that doesn't have the same nutrient content as a tomato you grow in a pot on your own porch. So organically and locally grown, I think just the research shows that is healthier.
This may be kind of a silly question, but I've always wondered, when they give you or sell you these on-the-vine tomatoes, is that because they're still sucking nutrients from the vine while the tomatoes are sitting on the store shelf?
I haven't heard a specific answer to that myself, but my speculation is that on the vine there isn't, there aren't leaves and there isn't a great deal of photosynthesis going on. So I'm not sure that I would believe that there's more nutrients coming from that little bit of stalk, if you will, vine, into the tomato.
So you think it's pretty much a gimmick?
My gut would tell me that. I'm not a plant physiologist. I did human biology, but from what I do know, I would believe that plant isn't undergoing much photosynthesis or nutrient transfer when it's separated from its root. in that manner.
Let's talk about something that's on everybody's mind, and that's our legislators in Washington, and they're trying to put together a workable health care plan that will reduce premiums and deductibles. What do you see as some of the solutions to solve our enormous health care delivery problem?
Well, for me, I really believe that the issue is the need for consumption in the healthcare industry. There's people on different schools of thought. Republicans believe one thing, Democrats believe another when it comes to healthcare. But for me, the bottom line is, regardless of how you pay for healthcare, I don't think anybody is going to be able to afford it with the rate we're going. We're looking at hockey stick exponential growth increases in diabetes, heart disease. So whatever we're doing in the management of these diseases really isn't working. So from our perspective, we believe that the number one cause of rising healthcare costs is sick people. And if the number one cause of costs are the sick or people that aren't as healthy as they could be, then the only real solution to this healthcare crisis is for there to be fewer sick people. And I've been dealing with this, studying this kind of stuff for 25 years, and I've yet to find a government program that can make anybody healthier.
Well, I understand we have a lot of sick people. In fact, just here in Idaho, we have about 20% of the population that really do need to be on Medicaid or are on Medicaid. That's almost 325,000. And, it's questionable as to whether these people are actually taken care of. How do you deal with Medicaid patients who refuse to be accountable for keeping themselves healthy? And how would you incentivize physicians to be responsible for their treatment and outcomes?
Well, Bob, that's a great question. I maybe would take a slight different approach to it and understand that really it might not just be one demographic or one population. We all could do better at taking better care of ourselves. And frankly, if we all did that, if we all created fewer sick people, then the system the problem would be largely self-solving. And
Greg, can I break you in here one more time? We've got one more break to do here, and we'll be back in a few minutes. You're listening to Healthy Inclusions, brought to you by Altrua Health Share, with your host Bob Neugebauer on 580 KIDO AM and 107.5 FM. Welcome back to Healthy Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We are speaking with Dr. Greg Furch, sponsored by Altrua Health Share. And we were speaking about Medicaid and how do you keep patients from being unhealthy?
Well, we were kind of moving in to answer that question. Again, we don't necessarily believe that there's government programs that can make anybody healthy, regardless of which side of the political aisle you're on. Only individuals making better lifestyle choices can have an impact on their own health. All the stuff that we talked about previously, only the individual can eat well, move well, think well. I joke with some of my patients about how I wish I could hire someone to go to the gym for me and then go to the, Outback for dinner and then call them and find out how the workout's going to see if I can get the cheesecake or not. Life isn't that way. Only we can make ourselves be healthier. Our families can't do it. Only we can eat well, move well, and think well. Our ancestors never really had the problems with heart disease, diabetes, and other chronic diseases like we have because they never stopped moving. And they didn't have, hamburger helper. They ate real food, and they worked their tails off and moved all day. And subsequently, they did not have the chronic disease that we have now. Sadly, we're seeing more chronic disease in our children. And for us, it's all about the quality of life. I believe that we're supposed to work our tails off during our working years, save up some resources so that when you get to the point where you decide to repurpose your life, that you have the physical wherewithal and the ability to enjoy life, enjoy the fruits of your working year labors. I'll use my dad as an example. He's approaching 72, but last year he summited Mount Adams over in Washington. And he said, I did it in my 50s, I did it in my 60s, I wanted to do it in my 70s. So he climbed Mount Adams and had really no difficulties. And we should be able to do that in our lives. We should be able to go golfing, hunting in the mountains. We should be able to have that quality of life. And for us, the good news is that is entirely possible. Just because Grandpa had heart disease doesn't mean that we're doomed to have heart disease. We can make those lifestyle adjustments and move ourselves towards that quality of life that we in our office want to see for everybody.
Well, tell me, how do you expect to incentivize people to actually look for this quality of life and be responsible for treating their bodies better when they've never been taught any better, and they live in this world of sedentary squalor, so to speak, and really are eating nothing but processed foods and taking nothing but drugs because that's the only thing that many of the doctors give out?
Well, one of our concerns, and again, not to get too in the weeds over it, but if, it's just kind of human nature that you get more of what you reward. And if we reward bad decisions, we're going to get more bad decisions. And so for us, one of the things that I participate in is a health savings account. I think they're phenomenal. And you can put some money in there, tax deferred, if you don't spend it on health care, and you can use that to promote your health. And now there's got to be some regulation that allows you to use that resource for, let's say prescribed omega-3 fatty acid, probiotics, gym memberships. And if we have those types of incentives towards healthy decisions, that kind of coincides with not rewarding negative healthy decisions.
Well, I like that idea, and rewards are always important. The problem is, how do you change the government structure, which is basically a giveaway with no incentive for people to keep healthy, and we continue to have more unhealthy people each and every year. Just as a for instance, do you believe that integrative medicine might be the answer to solving problems we currently have with our healthcare delivery system by having different types of physicians work with the allopathic doctors and trying to create a better environment to get people well?
Well, I mean, Bob, that's a great question. It almost seems silly that we would have to ask that question, but it's true. That I think would be a great approach. Unfortunately, there tends to be some politics in healthcare, and some people's access to alternative forms of health care, maybe things that fit more congruently with their lifestyle choices, they're limited in access. We have health plans, health insurance plans that limit access to cheaper, safer, more effective alternatives. And, if I have a little political twinge in there, leveling that playing field and giving patients the liberty to choose the forms of health care with truly informed consent, which means the pros and cons of each of the options, I don't think you can go wrong with that type of model.
Well, the state of Washington has had alternative and complementary health care as a requirement for insurers in that state for the last 20 years, and they've found the savings to be in the hundreds of millions over those years because people do tend to go for less invasive methods of getting well. Do you think that's something that we should start to think about here in Idaho with all of the patients that we have on Medicaid currently?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I've been a proponent of leveling that playing field and giving people, no matter their insurance status, whether it's an employer-provided policy, one that they've purchased on their own, a situation like Medicaid, Medicare, if you empower the people to make better health decisions and incentivize them that direction and not reward the bad decisions, that we're going to have a healthier, a drive towards a healthier population.
Well, we're looking at a critical point come 2025 because they expect to be a shortage of 90,000 allopathic doctors, and if we don't find some way to fill that gap, we're going to have a serious health care crisis in this country. Mm-hmm. And I don't think most people understand that you've got well over 1 million complementary and alternative practitioners out there who could fill that bill and fit in. The problem is getting it into the health care scheme of things.
Well, one of the economic challenges, Bob, is that if there's a modality that saves money in health care, it means that the modality that used to get that money is no longer getting it. And there are these economic pressures that are pushing, it's kind of like the tide that's coming in, it's going out. And there's this competition for the resources. But again, our goal in our office is to limit the need for the healthcare expenditures in the first place. You can fight over who's getting the money, but we're trying to limit the conditions or help people, educate people towards being able to self-limit the need for healthcare expenses.
Well, I'm sure we're not going to solve this problem today, but I'm certainly hopeful that we'll get you back on and we can discuss this a little bit further. We'd like to thank Dr. Furch for joining us this evening and for his enlightenment on epigenetics and his approach to wellness. This is Bob Neugebauer signing off for Healthy Conclusions. We hope you will join us again at the same time next Sunday for another hour of informative talk about nutrition, exercise, and alternative medicine options, sponsored by AltruaHealthShare.org and 580 KIDO AM and 107.5 FM.